You missed every target. The rifle instructor's voice echoed across Camp Pendleton's range, dripping with contempt as he stared at the elderly re-qualifier's pristine target, not a single hole visible. 69 years old, and you can't even hit paper at 100 yards? Thomas Parks stood silently at the firing line, his weathered hands still steady on the rifle, saying nothing. The younger Marine snickered. The instructor shook his head in disgust. This is exactly why we need age limits. If you believe experience deserves respect, type honor in the comments. Thomas Parks had returned to Camp Pendleton for his annual marksmanship qualification, something he'd done quietly for decades. The staff sergeant running the range that morning didn't recognize the name, didn't bother checking the roster notes, saw only an old man who looked like someone's grandfather wearing fatigues that seemed borrowed. Parks had requested the 1,000-yard range, an unusual choice for a standard qualification, but the sergeant waved him through with a smirk, figuring it would be entertaining to watch the old-timer struggle. What the sergeant didn't know, what nobody there that morning knew, was that Thomas Parks hadn't always been called Thomas. In certain circles, in certain classified after-action reports, he was known by a different name entirely. The morning had started poorly. Parks arrived early, moving slowly, his gait suggesting old injuries that never quite healed right. The range officer barely glanced at his ID, processing him through with the bored efficiency of someone who'd seen 1,000 weekend warriors try to relive their glory days. When Parks requested specific ammunition and asked about wind conditions at extended range, the sergeant's smirk deepened. "Sir, with all due respect, maybe we should start you at the 50-yard line." Parks had simply shaken his head, signed the range card, and moved to the 1,000-yard firing position. The handful of Marines conducting their own qualifications had paused to watch, word spreading quickly that some old guy was about to embarrass himself at distance. The shooting began. Parks settled into position with a familiarity that should have been the first clue. His breathing pattern textbook perfect, his body alignment suggesting decades of muscle memory. He fired slowly, methodically, taking his time between shots in a way that made the impatient young Marines check their watches. 15 rounds downrange over the course of 20 minutes. When he finally cleared his weapon and stood, the range officer called for target check. The spotters radioed back, confused. "No impacts visible, Sergeant. Target is clean." The sergeant's face lit up with vindicated amusement. He walked down to Parks, already composing the story he'd tell later. "Sir, I'm showing 0 hits on target. You want to try again at a closer range?" Parks had simply nodded toward the target stand. "Check behind the backstop." The sergeant frowned. "Sir, that's not how this works. If you missed, you missed." But something in Parks' calm demeanor made him pause. He radioed the spotters. "Do a visual on the backstop." The response took longer this time. Then, "Sergeant, you need to see this." The walk downrange felt longer than usual, the sergeant's confidence wavering as Parks followed silently behind, that same unreadable expression on his weathered face. The other Marines trailed along, curious now, sensing something had shifted in the atmosphere. The backstop was a massive earthen berm built to catch rounds, reinforced with railroad ties and steel plating. The spotters stood there, stunned, pointing. The sergeant looked where they indicated and felt his stomach drop. The target stand itself, the metal mounting system that held the paper target, showed a tight grouping of impacts clustered around the bolts that secured the frame. Not on the target. Through it. Deliberately. Parks had shot the mounting system itself, 15 rounds that would have been invisible from the firing line unless someone specifically checked the stand's hardware. "This is a SEAL demonstration technique," one of the spotters whispered, his voice awed. "It shows you can hit what you choose to hit, not just what you're told to hit." The sergeant's face had gone pale. "Who are you?" Parks reached into his pocket, pulled out a faded military ID card he rarely carried anymore. The name was different, Thomas Parks was his birth name, the one he'd returned to after retirement. But the call sign was there, along with credentials that made the sergeant's hands shake as he held the card. Deadeye Parks, SEAL Team Sniper Instructor. The man who had literally written portions of the Naval Special Warfare Sniper Manual. The man who had pioneered the backstop technique as a teaching tool to demonstrate the difference between acceptable accuracy and surgical precision. He'd been coming back for annual qualifications for 15 years, and somehow, in the rotation of personnel, his legend had been forgotten by a new generation who only saw an old man. The sergeant stood at attention so fast he nearly stumbled. "Sir, I apologize. I didn't. The roster didn't." Parks waved him off, his voice quiet. "The roster shouldn't matter. Every shooter deserves respect until they prove otherwise. I proved otherwise, just not the way you expected to see it." He turned to walk back to the firing line, then paused. "Those bolts I hit? They're what hold your target frames together. If I can put 15 rounds into a 6-inch cluster from 1,000 yards on moving metal, imagine what I could do to what I actually wanted to hit." The implication hung in the air. The younger Marine stood frozen, understanding washing over them. This wasn't just some old guy. This was a ghost, a legend they'd heard about in hushed tones during training, now standing in front of them in worn fatigues. The range officer made a call. Within 30 minutes, the base commander arrived, along with the senior SEAL instructor currently stationed at Pendleton. They found Parks sitting quietly on a bench, drinking water, seemingly unbothered by the chaos his demonstration had caused. The SEAL instructor, a man young enough to be Parks' son, actually rendered a salute despite Parks being long retired. "Sir, I trained under your manual. It's an honor." The base commander was less effusive but equally respectful, asking if Parks would consider conducting a demonstration for their current sniper candidates. Parks agreed, on one condition, that the young sergeant who dismissed him that morning be present for the entire session, not as punishment, but as a learning opportunity. He made an assumption based on what he saw. We all do. The lesson is what matters now. The story spread through Camp Pendleton like wildfire. Within days, Parks became a fixture at the range, conducting voluntary training sessions that drew Marines from across the base. The targets he shot became teaching aids, his impossible groupings on seemingly random target points demonstrating a level of marksmanship that most would never achieve. The young sergeant who'd mocked him became one of his most dedicated students. The shame of that morning transformed into fierce respect and determination. Parks never mentioned the incident again, but he didn't need to. The bullet-riddled target stand remained on display at the range facility, mounted with a plaque. "Excellence is not limited by age. Deadeye Parks, 1,000 yards." Those 15 rounds, invisible until someone looked beyond the obvious, became a permanent reminder that assumptions about capability based on appearance are the most dangerous kind of ignorance. Subscribe to my channel if you believe respect must be earned through actions, not granted based on age. The most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about people we think we can dismiss at a glance. Thomas, Deadeye. Parks proved that quiet competence speaks louder than youth, that true mastery doesn't announce itself. It simply performs. Every target we see is only part of the story. Sometimes the real impact is behind what we expect to find, waiting for someone wise enough to look deeper. Honor those who served, regardless of how many years have passed since they wore the uniform in active duty. Their skills, their dedication, their precision. These things don't retire just because their paperwork does.